Hello, and welcome back to the Layman's Perspective. So, we had a sit down, kind of a preview or a premiere of what may become a podcast. It's kind of a duct tape production, splicing together some audio and trying to throw in some visual. So, you'll have to see if you like it and if you want to continue this kind of thing. But what we talk about in this episode is, of course, kind of the relation between building a culture through friendship, godly friendships, compelling one another into kind of an organic cultural growth between friends, how that spreads to community and builds community, and how diet relates to these things. How closely food and what we are taking in our bodies, both spiritually and physically, are relating to the culture that we're building, and how this relates to really our religious perspective in a lot of areas. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. I'm glad that you filmed it with me, and hopefully we'll be able to make something out of this long term. So enjoy. So what we were talking about over dinner tonight, like the need for community and tradition, and just the idea that a lot of people, perhaps because of the internet, or at least incongruity with it, like people are lost. People don't have friendships and bonds. And I told you how I was reading C.S. Lewis and how much those things helped him, and a lot of people don't have that anymore. And so you were kind of explaining to me your experiences with the topic. So maybe you could
Yeah.
go through that again, like how you have been doing that and pursuing that over the past few years, and in your
Okay.
church and in your communities.
Yes. So I go to church pretty close to here, like half of 50 yards from here, maybe.
Yes.
And I grew up going to this church, and it's a good mix of old and young people. And at the time, I was one of the few younger men that went to this church and was very active in church. And I had just come back from college, and was looking for community with guys to for friendships. And I started. There was one particular guy that I asked if he wanted to start a Bible study. His name's Duncan, and at the time I didn't really think much of it. I don't know why I wanted to start a Bible study so much, or why I wanted friendship. I just knew. I think that was important. I don't know. Maybe it was somebody I was listening to at the time, or somebody I was following that suggested this. But I asked him to go to start a Bible study with me, and we started off meeting at my parents' house because that's where I was staying at the time. And
Would you say, to cut in,
yeah,
would you say that what was your primary motive in starting the Bible study with Duncan? Was it community based? Were you trying to specifically grow in biblical knowledge? What was kind of
I think it was probably both. We had gone through Ephesians in Sunday school, and he was in the Sunday school class, a young adults, college age, and going through Ephesians really opened my eyes to the importance of the church and the importance of the church and how God displays His glory through the church.
right?
And so, that actually, I was probably 20 years old at that time, and I think I had switched from thinking of church as important because this is what Christians do: is they go to church, and you go to church on Sunday mornings and maybe even Wednesday nights and Sunday evenings. And something in me changed whenever we went through Ephesians, and I thought, yeah, the church is the most important thing that a Christian can be a part of, because this is how God displays His glory.
Right.
And so I think that knowing that I knew I needed to sort of create a community, and so it started out with me and him, and it didn't you wouldn't think it would be that important. And I think I want something I figured out since then is, well, I'll get to that this other part later, but we started a Bible study. it was just me and him for probably a year. Just he and I meeting up. It was awkward at first. We weren't really friends. We weren't that close to begin with. And we'd meet and we'd talk about we'd set a certain portion of scripture to read, and we'd talk about it, or maybe we'd have a commentary we'd go through as part of that, and we'd talk about that. And then also just probably talk about life and then talk about the Bible. Just kind of get to know each other and then talk about the Bible. For about a year we did that.
So throughout that year, you guys, I know we were talking about this before, but kind of a culture develops between you two. You two are both growing, but there's also this artificial culture which is developing. And so you told me that it did eventually expand into other things. How did that look when it became something a little bit more than that? More people became involved in.
Yeah, I think the culture developed between me and Duncan, meeting at a diner after meeting at my parents' house, and just getting to know each other, talking about life, and then talking about the scripture and what we learned. That kind of culture developed between us, and it was organic. And we weren't really insecure that we didn't have a worry about that it was just us. We kind of enjoyed it, but we also knew we wanted to invite more guys if it seemed like they might fit the kind of culture that we were trying to develop. And it did. We invited probably a couple other guys at first. I became good friends with a guy that had visited Boulevard, and he was part of he grew up, he went to the same college, and he was part of the frat scene, kind of like ex fraternity Christian, and I guess that.
What was it, a Christian fraternity though?
It wasn't a Christian fraternity. It was and it's a totally different culture than I was used to. But I became good friends with him. Invited him to the Bible study. He was really on fire for knowing God and understanding Scripture, and so he brought a lot of a good dynamic to the group. And then invited another guy from church, and it was even maybe just at first it was me and Duncan, then it was maybe 3 of us, and then maybe 4. It eventually probably got up to like about 6 guys after we invited. He's kind of kept inviting guys, and it was really early in the morning, so it was hard for guys to really come not many guys wanted to come that early in the morning. We met, I think, probably 6:30. I think at first it was 6 o'clock, but then we changed it to 6:30, and it eventually became 6:45, probably because people would always be late.
Right.
So, I think what we learned from that, I think, is that with Bible studies in these groups, you're not only studying the Bible, which is that's the kind of the main goal, but you're also making friendships, and you're also, if somebody's visiting the church or somebody's interested in your church, it's a way for them to get to know you, outside of Sunday mornings and Sunday.
Right, and I think that's what happened with me when I visited your church. Yeah. We the first Sunday I just invited myself over to someone's house, but then after that I kind of I don't remember who did you invite me to lunch? You guys were like doing lunch with your group, and
usually we have. Yeah, it's all pretty basic stuff. I bet you probably a lot of churches do this. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
Have you, if you've experienced? Yeah, you invited yourself over to Josh's house.
Yes. Yeah.
The first week, and then I'm the single guy at church. Who a lot of people are married now, or they're with their parents, and my parents go to this church, but they don't. And I go to lunch with them sometimes, but I've kind of broken away in the sense that I go in my own. I try to eat with different people a lot. Yeah. And so usually after church I hang around, talk to my friends, talk to people, meet visitors, talk to my friends, and then usually I'm one of the last people in the building. Right, yeah. And so I usually try to ask people, where are you going for lunch? Or like, I'll invite myself sometimes, or I'll try to get people to go to a certain.
It's not fun to invite yourself, but one of the things I hear a lot of, particularly young guys, talking about is like how hard it is to meet new people, and um, I, I experienced that, but since I just built up confidence, I guess. But it's not that hard if you're just like, hey, can I come to your house for lunch or something?
I've never asked to go to somebody's house for lunch.
It
was probably harder than.
Well, I don't think I've ever asked it that way. It's kind of like, can we have lunch? And then
Oh,
if
yeah.
they have families, it's normally at their house. So
Yeah,
I'm just
it's-
aware that if they have kids, I'll probably be
Yeah.
having lunch at their house.
I've never gone to lunch at a person's house after church.
Oh yeah. Well, one of the things our church does is we all have lunch together, and so there's kind of a natural, like, I don't know, there's a lot of uh, natural community through that whole process, and so I think that has really helped me because now I don't have to ask myself over to people's houses.
Yeah.
I still have done it from time to time because it's like I want to know a particular family, but
Yeah, I think in, what is it? In Luke, the Gospel of according to Luke, it's I think every chapter there's something to do with eating. In the Gospel of Luke, yeah. It's either Luke or I think it's Luke. Might be Matthew, but I think it's Luke. So every chapter in that book there's something to do with eating, and
that's really interesting. That would be interesting to look into.
if you think about it, whenever we eat, there's sort of maybe it's something with the chemicals going through your brain, or just like the act of eating with somebody, you're creating a bond that I think you wouldn't create otherwise. And I think it's really important to eat together at my church, because we go to different churches. But I mean, that's part of, I think, the Lord's Supper, there's something to do with eating. It's eating together. You're as a body. You're all.
Yeah, there's something that G.K. Chesterton said about children, and that is when Christ came into the world as a baby, children could never be the same, and that is similar to food. When like bread and wine is the most basic of things, especially at that time period in history. It's so monotonous and boring that you wouldn't think of any real significance in the matter. But when Christ consecrated the bread and the wine, it did, at least for us who know Christ, it's like it's no longer just simply eating and drinking, but it's doing those things unto the Lord. And like you said in Ephesians, but it's all through the epistles, is the bread and the wine, the cup of fellowship with which we bless is it is tangential to the gospel. It's like very closely related to how we understand God and the gospel and one another.
Yeah, it's almost like you don't really know each other unless you've eaten together.
Right.
And in any kind of dating relationship, you'd be eating together.
Right.
In any family, you eat with your family.
Yeah.
There's no relationship that you really have outside of, and that's merely like, if you only play soccer together, you don't really know each other, even though you might be like really, like, you might be buddies.
Yeah.
But if you just play soccer together, you're not going to be that close.
Well, if you've ever been employed, this happens in the blue collar world. Some small companies will still take a monolithic lunch period, and people will eat together, and the employees are way closer, like significantly closer than people who just take lunch whenever, because there is something about like you're sitting down and just partaking in the there's camaraderie and fellowship,
And I was thinking about how religion, or at least diet, is really closely related to. When you talk about diet, you talk about different diets, keto or paleo or vegan or whatever your diet is. Maybe it's just the standard American diet.
Right. Yeah.
But whatever it is, it tells a lot about your culture. So if you are very strict about your diet, or you don't eat the standard American diet, you can't go out to eat after church, so you're not going to probably be fellowshipping with those people that eat differently than you do, or you might just be eating. If you have a very strict diet, you might be just going to eat at home, and so you end up.
That's actually a really good point to bounce off of that, because you made me think of something that I've always thought to be interesting, and I've gotten into some arguments about, but about the Mosaic Code on eating.
Yeah.
You mentioned how it's like religion. I think most religions have codes on eating, not only to this day, but just historically there are codes on eating, which kind of like demonstrates the importance of diet and separation, and kind of even when you use the words American diet, like there is an American diet and then there's the Chinese diet, and so there is something like very very closely intertwined with culture, and perhaps religion and culture are close enough to where it's just a overlap. But about what you said is how you might not be eating with certain people if you have dietary restrictions. And Paul, in the Christian religion, I think is pretty liberal in this point, and that Paul specifically says you actually don't pay attention to diet, because what's important is that you're eating with them.
Yeah.
And so it's like, even if you may have a conscientious problem, just don't even ask, and just partake so that you can eat with them, which seems pretty different. A Jew would never do that. A Muslim wouldn't do that. A Buddhist wouldn't do that. And so I think, but a Christian would. A Christian would be like, yeah, like I'll go and I'll eat with you, and if I think I might have a problem with it, I just won't ask.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I don't know, I just thought that was pretty interesting, because Christianity kind of takes a detour and
Yeah.
puts a different emphasis in that.
Yeah, I haven't thought about that part of how Christianity works into that. But sort of what I was thinking about is how when you bring up any kind of diet, people get really upset. People can get upset if, for instance, you might tell them that if you bring up veganism, people get really upset about veganism.
The vegans are the ones who are upset.
Yeah. Well, like people can get up, or if you bring up like the carnivore diet. If you bring up veganism and you talk about it in a bad light, there's probably somebody that's going to speak
my
up.
grandmother was cured from heart disease by veganism.
Or like
like
I'm not a vegan, but I think what they were doing is really admirable and hard to do. So I think that's a good thing, and it's really good for you. So they'll say it's so good for your body, and it's really hard to do. So you should commend them for what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or if I bring up the carnivore diet, somebody will think, oh, that's terrible for you. You have to have fiber in your diet, or you have to have vegetables, or else you're going to be really sick.
I do like vegetables. I brought up the carnivore diet to my dad, and he said it's the stupidest diet.
That's the kind of reaction that you get from people. Like people have very strong. I thought you were strong opinions about diet.
I thought you were going to make the point that like people are religious about like their dietary restrictions, even outside of a formal religious context.
Everybody's on a diet, in a sense. Everybody has what they eat and what they don't eat. And then if you try to say like, well, you should eat this, or well, you shouldn't eat that, it's like you're going against whatever their religion is. It's like you're talking about something religious to them.
Yeah. So how do you think that relates to the broader culture? And I kind of gave my thoughts on just off the top of my head how that relates to Christian culture, and that we value over diet, even if it violates our particular dietary restrictions. We value fellowship over our diet, because we would rather just not ask and fellowship.
Yeah.
So how do you think eating and partaking in food together does relate to culture? Do you think it just signifies a deeper connection within the culture that's being built, either in a family or with friends or whatever it may be?
Yeah, the dietary restrictions, or just eating and diet, how it relates to culture in the church. I think eating is culture, food is culture, and um, what you want to eat and what you don't want to eat, what you think's good for you and what you think's not good for you. It all is part of what you've learned about food, how you've lived, what you're used to, what you've experienced, kind of what you're. It even tells a little bit about what you're willing to experience, how open minded you are about other types of food, other types of culture, and I think that relates to. I haven't really thought about this much, too much, but I guess a Christian. I think a Christian should be very disciplined with. They shouldn't be gluttons. I think a lot of the time you go out to eat after church and you tend towards. I think restaurants are pretty bad with how they prepare food and what they put in the food. So I don't like going to restaurants personally after church. But I'll go to restaurants
Well, if you're
with people
yeah,
and eat.
and I think that's kind of what I was mentioning. I think and I'm with you. I think that like I was working a job where they would go out to eat at a fast food, and I don't normally eat fast food,
Yeah.
but I did in order to spend time with my coworkers and have that camaraderie. But I think I would agree with you, and I think the restrictions in the Christian diet are not on types of foods, but on consumption. Like there's a consumption basis, and I kind of see that. I think in many ways, um, I think in many ways it does reflect kind of a personality, but also like a cultural personality. So if there's a type of food which is appropriate or inappropriate, and I think what it seems what Christianity states like through their diet and culture is that everything's appropriate if it's in love, right? Like that's why you would eat something you didn't prefer is because you're gonna sit down, not ask questions, and just be particularly loving.
Yeah, yeah. I think as Christians, we should be open to going out to eat, going out to somewhere that's unclean, in a sense.
Right. Yeah.
But also, for myself, I have been strict with my diet at times in my life, and I have been more strict recently. But a lot of what I think about is that we still have agency in determining the kind of culture we create, because we do have a lot. Kind of going back to the Bible study, we do have agency in creating a culture, and creating a Bible study, you create friends and people that go there, and how the process of the Bible study that maybe because Duncan and we started talking about the week, what we've been up to. Maybe we just talk about, maybe for 20 minutes or 30 minutes, we just talk about things that we've been doing and things that are fun. We make jokes and catch up, and then you talk about the Bible study, and then somebody else comes and they sort of learn that's the way the Bible study flows. But also, I think what I'm trying to say is with food, you can create a culture, or you can bring your own culture, and you can invite people over, and you serve them food that you want them to experience. And I think something that is lacking when you just go out to eat after church.
So it's like a hospitality is almost a part of it.
Hospitality, yeah. And I think it has to be, if you want to, you have to create, if you want to create a culture, you're going to have to put work into it. And I think hospitality is work. And then having food that's interesting or good that people want to eat is also some work. But also, that's something that somebody's going to remember coming over to your house.
Yeah, for sure. No, it does. I mean, I think, I honestly think that's probably a good place to wrap up, because like, I think I agree completely, because it does take, hospitality is a part of it, and it's a part of it because you're bringing them into your culture in a lot of ways, and you're spreading, if you have this culture, like this is when you were talking about Duncan and you, You guys built something over a year, and then you spread it beyond that. And so it does take work, but it's a real blessing to see. Like once it's there, once you have that kind of culture, you are able to expand it. And hospitality is bringing people into your culture, bringing people into what you've built with your family or with your friends or with your church community.
I think it's kind of like with me and you tonight. We have for a few times just, I mean, maybe for the last, I don't know how many times we've gotten together and just talked. And then, I mean, we've had arguments, we've had times where we just eat together, but then you kind of get to know each other. And what our relationship is probably in the early stages of like what could be a long lasting friendship, but we don't really know what it's going to be like in the future exactly.
Right.
But it's also, this is kind of creating a culture and just having a friendship. Like a friendship is a culture, right. And then if you are, if like this is recorded, or if you create a YouTube channel or you create a podcast, you're kind of bringing people into that.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
And so you're kind of learning, you're sharing your culture in a way. I think, I don't know. Yeah.
I think that's good.